A hungry little girl asked a cowboy for bread. Hours later, he was fighting an entire outlaw army to save her family. "Please, we're so hungry," the cowboy who couldn't ride away. The wind carried dust through the dead streets of Red Hollow like ghosts searching for a home. It was the kind of town people passed through fast and forgot even faster. Half the buildings leaned sideways. The church bell hadn't rung in years. The general store windows were cracked, and the wooden signs creaked with every dry breath of the desert wind. Late afternoon sunlight burned gold across the empty road as a lone cowboy rode slowly into town. His name was Caleb Mercer. Tall, quiet, weathered by too many winters and too many regrets. His coat carried trail dust from 3 states. A revolver hung low at his side, though he hadn't drawn it in years. Under his hat, tired eyes scanned the town with the caution of a man who'd learned long ago that trouble usually waited where silence lived too long. His horse stopped near the old grocery store. Caleb swung down slowly, boots hitting the dirt with a heavy thud. The town felt wrong. Too quiet. No laughter. No piano music. No drunks arguing outside the saloon. Just wind. Then he heard it. A tiny cough. He turned toward the alley beside the store. At first, he saw nothing but shadows. Then 3 small figures moved. Children. 2 little girls and a boy. Filthy clothes hung from their thin bodies like torn blankets. Their faces were streaked with dirt. Bare feet rested against the cold ground. The youngest girl couldn't have been older than 4. The boy held a tiny crust of bread in both hands. Not eating it, protecting it, Caleb froze. The oldest girl stepped in front of the others like she was trying to protect them. "We ain't stealing," she whispered. Her voice cracked from thirst. Caleb slowly crouched to their level. "Didn't say you were." The boy stared at him carefully. "Mama said not to trust men with guns." Caleb looked down at the revolver on his hip. "Your mama's probably smart." For the first time, the youngest girl smiled weakly. Then her stomach growled loud enough for all of them to hear. The children looked embarrassed. Caleb's chest tightened. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Inside was the last of his travel food. 2 biscuits, dried beef, an apple. The children stared like he'd opened a treasure chest. Caleb handed the food to them carefully. The boy immediately broke the biscuit into 3 equal pieces before taking any for himself. That hit Caleb harder than he expected. Kids that hungry usually ate fast. These ones had learned to share starvation. "What are your names?" Caleb asked softly. The oldest girl answered first. "Emily." She pointed beside her. "That's Noah." Then the smallest child leaned sleepily against her sister. "And this is Daisy." Caleb nodded slowly. "You got parents nearby?" Silence. Emily lowered her eyes. "Our mama died 3 days ago." The wind seemed to stop. Caleb stared at her. No tears came from the girl's eyes when she said it. That was the worst part. Children should cry when they lose their mother. But these kids looked like life had already taken too much for tears to matter anymore. "She got sick," Noah whispered. "Couldn't breathe good." "Where is she buried?" Caleb asked. The children looked at each other nervously. Finally Emily pointed behind the church. Caleb swallowed hard. "You buried her yourselves." Emily nodded once. "No child should know how to dig a grave." Caleb looked away toward the empty street. He had spent years convincing himself he rode alone because it was easier that way. No attachments, no responsibilities, no pain. But now 3 starving children sat in front of him sharing crumbs like it was a feast. And something inside him cracked open. A saloon door suddenly slammed across the street. A large man stepped outside laughing drunkenly with 2 others behind him. The moment he saw the children, his face twisted with annoyance. "There they are," he barked. "Told you rats were still hiding around town." Emily immediately pulled Daisy closer. The cowboy's eyes narrowed. The drunk man pointed at the children. "I warned you brats to stay away from my store." Noah stood shakily. "We didn't steal nothing." "Shut your mouth." The man grabbed a rock from the road and tossed it hard toward them. Daisy screamed. Before the rock landed, Caleb caught it. The entire street went silent. The drunk man squinted. "Well now," he muttered. "Looks like the stray dogs found themselves a hero." Caleb slowly stood, tall enough to make the man's confidence fade just a little. You throw another thing at those kids, Caleb said quietly, and you'll be picking your teeth out of the dirt. The two men behind the drunk took a cautious step backward. Everyone in towns like this recognized dangerous calm. And Caleb Mercer carried it like a shadow. The drunk scoffed, trying to save face. You passing through or looking for trouble? Caleb dropped the rock. Depends. His hand rested near his revolver. The street became still again. Finally the drunk spat into the dirt. Ain't worth it. He turned and disappeared back into the saloon. But before entering, he looked over his shoulder. You protect those kids tonight if you want, cowboy. But this town eats the weak alive. The door slammed shut. Silence returned. Emily looked up at Caleb carefully. Thank you. Caleb exhaled slowly. When's the last time you all slept somewhere warm? The children didn't answer. That was answer enough. Caleb glanced toward the livery stable nearby. Most likely abandoned. Still usable. Come on, he said. The kids hesitated. You ain't gotta be scared. Emily studied him carefully like she was trying to decide whether kindness could still be trusted. Finally she nodded. Caleb led them toward the stable. Inside, the smell of hay and horses still lingered. Moonlight slipped through cracks in the wood walls. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. The children curled together in the hay while Caleb built a small fire in an old metal bucket. Daisy fell asleep almost instantly. Noah tried to stay awake. You a sheriff? The boy asked quietly. Caleb gave a tired smile. No. You ever kill anybody? Emily looked horrified, but Caleb answered honestly. Yes. Noah swallowed hard. Bad men, mostly. The boy nodded slowly like that answer made sense to him. After a long silence, Emily finally spoke. You gonna leave tomorrow? The question hit harder than a bullet. Because Caleb had asked himself the same thing the moment he met them. He had no home, no ranch, no family waiting anywhere, just miles of empty road. Taking care of 3 orphan children wasn't something a drifting cowboy survived easily. It meant responsibility, food, danger, heartbreak. He stared into the fire for a long moment, then looked at the children. Daisy sleeping against Emily's shoulder. Noah trying to act brave even while exhausted. 3 tiny souls abandoned by the world. Caleb removed his hat slowly. My little brother died hungry, he said quietly. The children looked up. Long time ago. Winter hit hard. We didn't have enough food. His voice roughened. I was supposed to protect him. Emily listened carefully. But I failed. The stable stayed silent except for crackling firewood. Caleb looked at them again. So no, he finally whispered. I ain't leaving tomorrow. For the first time since he met them. Emily cried. Small tears rolled silently down her dirty cheeks as years of fear finally broke loose. Caleb looked away respectfully, pretending not to notice. But inside, he made himself a promise. Nobody would hurt these children again. Not while he was breathing. Outside, thunder rumbled far across the dark desert. And in the saloon across town, the drunk man from earlier sat at a poker table speaking quietly to someone hidden in the shadows. A tall stranger in a black coat. What's the problem? The stranger asked. The drunk took a nervous drink. Cowboy showed up. The stranger's eyes narrowed. What cowboy? Name's Mercer. Silence. Then the stranger slowly looked up. You sure? Yeah. The man in black leaned back carefully. Because there was only one Mercer feared across half the frontier. Caleb Mercer. The former gunslinger who disappeared after the Black Creek Massacre. A man rumored to have buried 6 outlaws in under 30 seconds. The stranger smiled darkly. Well now, he whispered. This just got interesting. The town that buried its secrets. The storm arrived just before dawn. Rain hammered the roof of the old stable while cold winds slipped through the broken wooden walls. Caleb Mercer sat awake beside the fading fire, one hand resting near his revolver. Years on the frontier had trained him to sleep lightly, especially when trouble smelled close. Across from him, the 3 children slept together beneath an old horse blanket Caleb had found hanging nearby. Daisy clung tightly to Emily even in her sleep. No small hand still gripped the half-eaten apple from earlier like he feared it might disappear if he let go. Caleb stared at them quietly. He hadn't planned on caring about anybody again. But life rarely asked permission before changing a man. Outside, thunder rolled across Red Hollow. Then came footsteps, slow, heavy, approaching the stable. Caleb stood silently. The stable doors creaked open. An older man stepped inside carrying a lantern. Gray beard, long coat soaked from rain, wrinkled eyes sharp as a hawk's. The man noticed Caleb instantly. So the rumors were true, he muttered. Caleb didn't move. You armed? The old man gave a tired smile. At my age, arthritis is weapon enough. Caleb relaxed slightly but kept cautious. What do you want? The man glanced toward the sleeping children. Heard somebody finally took pity on them. You know them, knew their mama. He removed his wet hat. Name's Walter Briggs. I run the church. Caleb studied him carefully. Pastor. Maybe, or maybe not. In towns like this, survival taught people to lie easily. Walter stepped closer to the fire. The little one sick again? Caleb looked at Daisy. Her cheeks were flushed red. Even asleep, her breathing sounded weak. She's got fever, Caleb said. Walter nodded grimly. She's had it 2 days. Caleb's jaw tightened. There a doctor nearby? Walter laughed softly. Nearest doctor's 30 miles east. Most folks here can't even afford bread. The old pastor crouched beside Daisy carefully and touched her forehead. She needs medicine soon. Emily stirred awake suddenly. The moment she saw Walter, fear crossed her face. No, Walter noticed. It's all right, child. But Emily grabbed Daisy protectively. No, it ain't. Caleb immediately caught the tension. What's wrong? Emily hesitated. Walter slowly stood again. She blames me for her mother dying. You told Mama not to fight them, Emily whispered angrily. The old man sighed heavily. She was trying to protect you. From who? Caleb asked. Silence filled the stable. Rain pounded harder outside. Finally Walter looked at Caleb carefully. You really want to know what kind of town this is? Caleb didn't answer. Walter took that as yes. Red Hollow used to be decent. Small, honest. Folks worked cattle and mining. He stared toward the storm outside. Then the Blackthorne brothers arrived. Even hearing the name made Emily tense. They bought the mines, Walter continued. Bought the sheriff. Bought half the town. And the other half? Caleb asked. Walter's face darkened. They buried. Lightning flashed across the stable. The brothers run everything now. Food, water, supplies. Anyone who opposes them disappears. Noah woke quietly, listening. Our mama opposed them, the boy whispered. Walter nodded sadly. She discovered something. Caleb's eyes narrowed. What? Before Walter could answer, a gunshot exploded outside. The children screamed awake. Caleb instantly drew his revolver and moved toward the stable entrance. Another shot blasted through the rain. A horse cried out somewhere nearby. Then came shouting. They're in there. Caleb cursed under his breath. Walter's face turned pale. They found you already. How many? Too many. Caleb looked around fast. Back wall. Weak wood. Possible escape. He turned to Emily. Take Daisy and stay low. The girl nodded immediately. Noah looked terrified but tried hiding it. Caleb moved toward the stable doors carefully. Outside, shadows moved through the rain. 4 men, maybe 5. One voice shouted, "Bring out the kids, Cowboy. Nobody else gotta get hurt." Caleb recognized the drunk from yesterday. The saloon bully, but another voice answered from outside. Cold, calm, dangerous. You should have left town, Mercer. Caleb froze. That voice, he knew it. Slowly, he stepped outside into the rain. Lightning cracked across the sky. And there he stood, tall black coat, silver revolver, scar across his chin. Elias Blackthorne, one of the deadliest gunmen west of Texas. The man smiled faintly. Well, I'll be damned. Caleb's eyes hardened. You're still alive. Disappointed. The rain poured harder between them. The other outlaws stayed back carefully. Even they understood something dangerous stood in the middle of that muddy street. Caleb Mercer and Elias Blackthorne had history written in blood. You run this town now? Caleb asked. Elias shrugged. Somebody had to. His eyes drifted toward the stable. The children belong to me. Caleb's expression darkened instantly. They ain't property. Elias smirked. Everything's property. Caleb stepped forward slowly. You threatening kids now? No. Elias tilted his head slightly. Just looking for something their mama stole. Inside the stable, Emily overheard every word. Fear filled her face. Walter noticed immediately. "Emily," he whispered carefully. "Where is it?" The girl looked terrified. "I hid it. Outside." Caleb kept his revolver lowered but ready. "What did she steal?" Elias smiled thinly. "A ledger." Caleb frowned. "A bookkeeping ledger. One containing names," Elias replied. "Payments, deals, shipments." Walter stepped outside slowly. "That ledger proves the Blackthorns murdered people." Elias looked annoyed. "Careful, preacher." Walter ignored him. "They killed ranchers, stole land, burned homes." The storm roared around them. Caleb looked back toward the stable. The children weren't random victims. They were targets. Elias suddenly sighed. "You know what disappoints me, Mercer?" Caleb said nothing. "You disappeared after Black Creek. I thought maybe guilt finally killed you." At the mention of Black Creek, Caleb's face turned stone cold. The other outlaws exchanged nervous looks. Everyone knew the story. Years ago, Caleb Mercer had worked as a hired gun during a mining war. Then something terrible happened. Afterward, 6 men died. And Caleb vanished. Elias smiled darker. "You remember that little girl caught in the crossfire?" Caleb's hand tightened around his revolver. "Careful, you still hear her screaming at night." The words hit like a knife. Inside the stable, Noah whispered to Emily, "What happened at Black Creek?" Emily shook her head silently. Outside, Caleb slowly stepped closer to Elias. Rainwater dripped from the brim of his hat. "You came all this way just for a ledger?" Elias' eyes sharpened. "No," he smiled slightly. "I came because men like you don't deserve second chances." The air turned deadly quiet. Then, Daisy began coughing violently inside the stable. Weak, painful. Walter rushed toward her. "She can't breathe." Emily panicked instantly. "No, Daisy." Caleb looked back. One glance told him everything. The little girl was getting worse fast. Walter looked at Caleb urgently. "She needs medicine tonight or she won't survive till morning." The nearest doctor was 30 miles away. Through storm and outlaw territory. Elias noticed Caleb's hesitation, then smiled. "Well now." He slowly holstered his gun. "Looks like you got yourself a choice, cowboy." Caleb stared at him coldly. "Either protect the children," lightning flashed, "or save the little one." The outlaws laughed quietly, because they understood the trap. If Caleb left town for medicine, the others would be vulnerable. If he stayed, Daisy might die before sunrise. For a moment, even the storm seemed silent. Then Noah stepped forward trembling. "You should go," the boy whispered. Emily looked shocked. "Noah, she's our sister." The boy's eyes filled with tears he tried desperately to hide. "We can hide." Caleb looked at the children. Then toward Elias Blackthorn. The outlaw smiled confidently. He believed he had already won. But Elias forgot something important. Caleb Mercer had survived by doing impossible things. The cowboy slowly mounted his horse. Rain poured across his face. Then he looked toward Walter. "Lock every door." Walter nodded nervously. Caleb turned toward the children one last time. "All come back." Emily's voice shook. "What if they attack?" Caleb's eyes moved toward Elias. "Then pray for them." And with that, the cowboy spurred his horse into the storming night, leaving thunder, fear, and unfinished violence behind him. But hidden beneath the stable floorboards, Emily clutched the stolen ledger tightly against her chest. And she still hadn't told anyone the truth. Inside those pages was a secret powerful enough to start a war. The gunslinger who came back from hell. The storm swallowed Caleb Mercer whole. Rain lashed across his face as his horse thundered through the darkness, hooves crashing against muddy earth. Lightning split the sky above the desert hills, briefly revealing cliffs, dead trees, and the long empty road ahead. 30 miles to the nearest doctor. 30 miles back, and a little girl running out of time. Caleb leaned lower over the saddle. "Come on, boy," he muttered to the horse. Just a little farther. Behind him, Red Hollow disappeared into the storm like a bad memory. But Caleb knew Elias Blackthorn too well. The outlaw wouldn't wait long before making his move. Inside the old stable, Walter Briggs pushed heavy crates against the doors while Noah nailed broken boards across the windows with shaking hands. Emily sat beside Daisy in the hay. The little girl's fever had gotten worse. Her tiny body trembled violently beneath the blanket. "Please wake up," Emily whispered, brushing wet hair from Daisy's forehead. Daisy's eyes barely opened. As the cowboy coming back, Emily forced herself to smile. Yeah, but fear twisted inside her chest. Because life had taught her something cruel. People always left eventually. Walter finished barricading the door and looked toward Emily carefully. We need to talk about that ledger. Emily immediately stiffened. No, child, people will die for that thing. They already did. The old pastor sighed heavily. You don't understand how dangerous the blackthorns are. Emily's eyes burned with anger far older than a child should carry. My mama trusted people. That's why she's dead. Walter had no answer. Outside, thunder rolled across town. Then, footsteps. Noah froze near the window. Someone's out there. The stable fell silent. Another sound followed. Metal scraping slowly against wood. Walter's face paled. They're here. Outside, 3 shadowy figures circled the stable through the rain. One carried a lantern, another held a shotgun, and standing calmly between them was Elias Blackthorn. Emily, he shouted through the storm. You know how this ends. Emily clutched Daisy tighter. Walter stepped toward the door. Leave these children alone. Elias laughed softly. You still preaching courage, old man? Then his voice turned cold. You got 1 minute. Inside the stable, Noah looked terrified. What do we do? Walter's mind raced desperately. They couldn't fight armed men. Couldn't outrun horses. And Caleb was gone. Emily suddenly stood. I'll give him the ledger. Walter grabbed her arm instantly. No, he'll kill us anyway. Maybe, Walter whispered. But if Elias gets that ledger, he'll own this town forever. Outside, the outlaws began kicking the stable doors. Wood cracked loudly. Daisy woke crying weakly. Emily's panic deepened. Then, a new sound cut through the storm. Horse hooves. Fast. Very fast. Everyone turned. Elias narrowed his eyes toward the darkness beyond town. A single rider burst through the rain like a ghost. Caleb. But he wasn't alone. Another horse followed behind him carrying saddlebags filled with supplies. The cowboy had made impossible time. Elias cursed under his breath. Caleb rode straight toward the stable at full speed. Gunfire exploded instantly. Boom. One outlaw fired first. Caleb ducked low as the bullet tore through his hat. Then Caleb fired back. Bang. The outlaw spun off his feet into the mud. The second gunman raised his shotgun. Too slow. Bang. Caleb's bullet shattered the weapon from his hands. The man screamed and collapsed. Elias dove behind a water trough as bullets ripped through the rain. Caleb reached the stable in seconds. Open it. Walter yanked the doors aside just enough. Caleb tossed the medicine bag inside. Help Daisy. Emily caught the supplies desperately. Walter searched quickly through the bag. Antibiotics. Fever powder. Relief flooded his face. This might save her. Outside, Caleb dismounted calmly despite bullets flying around him. Rainwater streamed down his coat. Elias stepped from cover slowly, revolver drawn. You always were stubborn. Caleb spun the cylinder in his gun once. And you always talk too much. Lightning flashed between them, 2 legends of the frontier standing face to face. The outlaws backed away nervously. Nobody wanted to stand between those 2 men. Elias smirked slightly. You know, I really did miss this. Caleb's eyes stayed cold. I didn't. For a second, neither moved. Then both guns fired at once. Bang, bang. The shots echoed across Red Hollow. A lantern exploded nearby. Horses screamed. Mud kicked into the air beside Caleb's boots. Elias. Sleeve tore from Caleb's bullet grazing his arm. Both men fired again. Bang. A stable beam shattered. Bang. Elias. Hat flew off into the rain. Inside, the children huddled together listening to death outside the walls. Noah whispered, "Is Caleb gonna die?" Emily didn't answer, because she didn't know. Outside, Elias smiled again despite blood running down his arm. That all you got left, Mercer? Caleb reloaded calmly. No. Suddenly Elias' expression shifted. Because Caleb wasn't aiming at him anymore. He was aiming higher, at the water tower above the street. Elias' eyes widened. Oh, bang. The wooden supports exploded apart. Thousands of gallons of water crashed downward instantly. The tower collapsed across the street like thunder itself. Outlaws scattered in panic. Horses broke loose screaming into the storm. Elias barely rolled clear before the tower smashed into the mud where he'd been standing seconds earlier. Caleb moved fast, too fast. Before Elias fully recovered, Caleb grabbed him by the coat and slammed him hard against the trough. The revolver flew from Elias' hand. Caleb's gun pressed under his chin instantly. Rain poured over both men. Elias breathed heavily. "There he is," he whispered. "The butcher of Black Creek." Caleb's finger tightened on the trigger. Memories flashed behind his eyes. Fire. Gunshots. Screaming. A little girl caught between bullets. The reason Caleb abandoned guns years ago. Elias noticed the hesitation instantly. And smiled. "You still can't pull the trigger, can you?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "You should have stayed buried, Elias. You know why you won't shoot me?" The outlaw leaned closer. "Because deep down, you know you're worse than me." For a dangerous second, Caleb looked ready to kill him. Then, Daisy coughed violently inside the stable. The sound snapped Caleb back to reality. That tiny weak cough carried more power than hatred ever could. Caleb lowered the gun slightly. Big mistake. Elias slammed his head forward into Caleb's face. Crack. Caleb stumbled backward. Elias grabbed a hidden knife from his boot and slashed hard across Caleb's shoulder. Blood instantly soaked through the cowboy's coat. Emily screamed from inside. Elias jumped onto a nearby horse. "This ain't over," he shouted. Then he disappeared into the storm with the remaining outlaws. Silence slowly returned. Only rain remained. Caleb stood breathing hard, blood dripping from his shoulder into the mud. Walter rushed outside. "You're hurt." "I've had worse." But even Caleb looked pale now. Inside the stable, Daisy's fever finally began easing as Walter gave her the medicine. Emily looked toward Caleb standing alone in the rain. Broken, bleeding, exhausted, yet still protecting people who weren't even his. For the first time since her mother died, the little girl felt something dangerous. Hope. Later that night, the storm finally weakened. Walter bandaged Caleb's shoulder while the children slept nearby. "You should rest," the old pastor said. Caleb winced slightly. "Can't." "Why?" Caleb stared into the fire quietly. "Because Elias ain't after the ledger anymore." Walter frowned. "What do you mean?" Caleb's expression darkened. "He's after me." Outside, dawn slowly began rising over Red Hollow. But far beyond town, Elias Blackthorne rode hard through the desert toward the mountains. Toward something hidden. Toward men far more dangerous than himself. And as blood dripped from his wounded arm, Elias smiled coldly. Because the war had finally begun. And next time, he wouldn't come alone. The secret hidden in the mountains. Morning arrived gray and cold over Red Hollow. Rainwater still dripped from rooftops while muddy streets sat empty beneath the pale sunrise. The storm had passed, but the town felt heavier now. Like it knew violence was coming. Inside the stable, Daisy finally slept peacefully for the first time in days. Walter Briggs quietly packed herbs and bandages into a small leather bag while Caleb sat nearby getting his shoulder stitched. Without whiskey, without complaint, Emily watched carefully from across the room. "You ain't even gonna yell?" Noah asked nervously. Caleb glanced at him. "Would it help?" Noah thought about it seriously. "Probably not." Caleb gave the smallest smile. That tiny smile surprised the children more than gunfire ever could. Because hard men usually didn't smile. Walter tied off the bandage tightly. "There," he muttered. "You'll live." "Bad news." Walter frowned. "You got fever coming if you keep pushing yourself." Caleb slowly pulled his shirt back on. "Don't got much choice." Emily stepped closer carefully. "You really think Elias is coming back?" Caleb looked toward the stable doors. "Men like him always come back." The girl hesitated before asking the question sitting heavy on her heart. "Why's he scared of that ledger?" Walter and Caleb exchanged a look. Finally Walter answered quietly. "Because the ledger proves something bigger than murder." Emily frowned. "What?" Walter lowered his voice. "The Blackthorns aren't just stealing land." He reached carefully into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded paper. Old, wrinkled, official looking. "This came from your mother before she died." Emily took it slowly. "What is it?" "A railroad contract." Caleb's eyes narrowed immediately. Walter nodded grimly. "The government plans to build a major rail line through these lands." Realization slowly crossed Caleb's face. And the Blackthorns wanna own every acre before that happens. Walter pointed toward the paper. Whoever controls Red Hollow becomes richer than kings. Noah looked confused. So they killed people for money. Caleb's voice turned cold. Men kill for less every day. Emily stared down at the contract. My mama found this out. Walter nodded. She discovered the Blackthorns forged land deeds and murdered ranchers who refused to sell. The old pastor's face darkened. She copied names into the ledger before they caught her. Emily's hands trembled slightly. That's why they killed her. Nobody answered. Because they didn't need to. Outside, a horse suddenly approached fast. Caleb instantly reached for his revolver. The stable doors burst open. A young Mexican rider stumbled inside breathing hard. Mercer. Caleb frowned. Who are you? Name's Tomas. The young man looked terrified. You gotta leave town now. Why? Tomas swallowed hard. Elias reached the mountains last night. Walter's face went pale instantly. No. Caleb stood slowly. What mountains? Tomas looked at him carefully. Raven Ridge. Even hearing the name made the room colder. Noah whispered softly. What's Raven Ridge? Caleb's expression hardened. A mining camp. Walter corrected him quietly. Not anymore. Years ago, Raven Ridge had been one of the bloodiest outlaw camps in the territory. Killers, bounty hunters, gun smugglers, men too violent for civilized towns gathered there. And one man ruled them all. Silas Kane. The name alone carried death. Tomas looked toward Caleb nervously. Elias is asking Kane for soldiers. How many? Could be 30 men, maybe more. Emily's eyes widened. 30. Caleb cursed quietly under his breath. They couldn't survive that. Not in Red Hollow. Not trapped. Walter spoke carefully. There may still be time. Caleb looked at him. For what? Walter hesitated. Then finally, there's another copy of the evidence. Emily looked shocked. What? Walter nodded slowly. Your mother hid papers before she died. Where? The old pastor stared toward the distant mountains visible beyond town. At Black Creek. Silence hit the stable. Caleb's entire body stiffened instantly. Noah looked confused again. What's Black Creek? But Caleb already knew. The place that destroyed his life. The place he swore never to return. Walter stepped closer. Your mother believed if anything happened to her, someone honest might still expose the Blackthorns. Caleb laughed bitterly. Honest men died a long time ago. Walter ignored the comment. The papers are hidden inside the old mining office at Black Creek. Emily looked between them. Then we should go get them. Caleb immediately shook his head. No. Why not? Because Black Creek was cursed. Not by ghosts. By memory. Caleb still remembered the screams. The fire. The little girl caught between two gangs during the massacre years ago. He had tried saving her. Failed. That failure haunted every mile he'd ridden since. We ain't going there, Caleb said firmly. Emily stepped forward angrily. My mama died protecting those papers. And more people'll die if we go. You're scared. The words hit hard. Caleb stared at her. The girl's eyes burned with fury and grief. You act tough, she whispered, but you're scared too. Walter tried interrupting. Emily. No. Tears filled the girl's eyes now. You promised you wouldn't leave us. Caleb's voice hardened. And I ain't. Then help us. The stable fell silent. Even Noah looked frightened now. Caleb turned away toward the doorway. Because the child was right. He was scared, not of dying, of remembering. Suddenly Tomas spoke again. There's more. Everyone looked at him. The young rider swallowed nervously. I overheard Elias talking. Caleb narrowed his eyes. Talking about what? Tomas hesitated. About the little girl from Black Creek. The air changed instantly. Caleb slowly turned. What did he say? He said, she never died. For a moment, nobody breathed. Caleb stared at Tomas like the world had tilted sideways. That's impossible. Tomas shook his head quickly. I swear it. Walter looked stunned. The child survived. Caleb's pulse thundered in his ears. All these years. The guilt. The nightmares. The belief he failed. Could the girl still be alive? Emily watched Caleb carefully. For the first time since meeting him, she saw something crack behind his hard expression. Hope. Dangerous hope. Then, gunfire erupted outside town. Everyone jumped. A man screamed somewhere in the distance. Tomas rushed toward the window. They're here already. Caleb grabbed his revolver instantly. But this wasn't Elias. These gunshots sounded different, closer, messier. Panicked, another rider burst down the street yelling, "Blackthorn men are burning houses." Smoke suddenly rose beyond town. Walter cursed, "They're forcing people out." Caleb looked toward the children. Decision time: stay in Red Hollow and die, or run toward Black Creek and face the ghosts waiting there. Emily stepped beside him quietly. "You said nobody would hurt us again." Caleb stared out at the smoke rising into the sky, then slowly holstered his revolver. "Pack what you can carry." Walter blinked. "You're going?" Caleb's eyes darkened. "Looks like I'm riding back into hell." Within minutes, the stable became chaos. Walter loaded supplies. Noah grabbed blankets. Emily carefully wrapped Daisy in Caleb's spare coat. Outside, townspeople screamed as fires spread through Red Hollow. Blackthorn riders stormed the streets forcing families from homes at gunpoint. Caleb mounted his horse and looked toward the mountains far beyond the desert. Black Creek waited there, along with answers buried for years. Tomas climbed onto another horse nervously. "You really think we can make it?" Caleb checked his revolver cylinder. "No." The young rider swallowed hard. "Then why go?" Caleb looked toward the frightened children. "Because sometimes surviving ain't the point." Then the cowboy pulled his hat low over his eyes. And together, they rode straight toward the mountains. Toward Black Creek. Toward the secret that could destroy powerful men. But high above them on a distant ridge, Elias Blackthorn watched through a rifle scope. And beside him sat a terrifying figure dressed entirely in black. Silas Kane, the outlaw king of Raven Ridge. The man smiled slowly as the riders disappeared into the desert. "Interesting," Kane whispered. Then he looked toward Caleb Mercer far below. "Bring him to me alive." The devil of Raven Ridge. The mountains rose like jagged teeth against the evening sky. Cold wind swept through the narrow canyon trails as Caleb Mercer rode at the front of the group, eyes locked ahead beneath the shadow of his hat. Behind him, Walter guided the supply horse carefully while Noah clung tightly to the saddle. Emily rode beside Caleb with Daisy wrapped in blankets against her chest. Nobody spoke much. The closer they got to Black Creek, the quieter Caleb became. Even the horses seemed nervous entering those mountains. Tomas finally broke the silence. "How far now?" Caleb pointed toward a narrow ridge ahead. "Other side of that pass." Walter looked uneasy. "We should stop before dark." "No." Caleb's voice stayed firm. "We ride through." Emily noticed his hand trembling slightly near the reins. Not fear of gunmen, fear of memory. Then the wind shifted. Caleb instantly raised his fist. Everyone stopped. "What is it?" Noah whispered. Caleb slowly looked toward the rocks above them. Movement. Tiny. Fast. Rifle barrels. Down. Caleb roared. Gunfire exploded from the cliffs. Bang. 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 Bullets shattered rocks around them. Horses screamed in panic. Tomas nearly fell from his saddle as shots tore through the canyon walls. "Ambush!" Walter shouted. Caleb fired upward instantly. Bang! One gunman tumbled from the rocks above. "Move!" Caleb yelled. The group rode hard through the canyon as bullets rained behind them. Outlaws appeared along both ridges. Too many. At least 20. Silas Kane's men. Their leader stepped onto a cliff edge above them wearing a long black duster coat. Tall, broad shoulders, silver beard, eyes dead as winter. Silas Kane. Even from a distance, the man carried pure menace. He didn't shout, didn't rage. Men like Kane never needed to. He simply watched the chase calmly while chaos erupted below. "Take the children alive," he ordered quietly. Caleb heard him, and for the first time in years, real fear touched him, because Silas Kane was no ordinary outlaw. He was the kind of man entire towns disappeared from. The canyon narrowed sharply ahead. Trap. Caleb saw it instantly. "So much for riding through," Walter muttered. Bullets slammed into the rocks beside them again. Emily cried out as her horse stumbled. Caleb wheeled around immediately. "Emily!" The girl struggled to control the terrified horse. Daisy began screaming. Another shot cracked through the canyon. Boom! Emily's saddle strap snapped apart. She fell hard into the dirt. "Emily!" Noah shouted. The outlaws rode closer. Fast. Caleb spun his horse around without hesitation. Walter grabbed his arm. "You can't go back." Caleb ripped free. "Take the kids and ride." Then he charged straight toward the gunfire. Toward impossible odds, Emily struggled to stand as riders thundered toward her through dust and smoke. The first outlaw grinned beneath rotten teeth. "Got her." Then Caleb hit him like a storm. Bang! The outlaw flew backward off his horse. Caleb leaned down from the saddle and grabbed Emily's arm. "Hold on." She clung tightly as Caleb pulled her onto his horse seconds before more bullets struck the ground around them. The canyon erupted into chaos. Caleb fired left-handed while steering with the other. Bang! Another outlaw dropped, but more kept coming. Too many. Silas Kane watched calmly from above, then slowly reached for his rifle. Walter saw him first. Caleb. Too late. Kane fired once. Boom. Caleb jerked violently in the saddle. Emily screamed. Blood exploded across Caleb's side. The cowboy nearly fell but somehow stayed mounted. Kane lowered the rifle slowly. Cold satisfaction crossed his face. But Caleb didn't stop riding. Even wounded, even bleeding heavily, he pushed the horse harder until finally the group burst free from the canyon into open mountain forest. The outlaws didn't follow immediately, because Kane raised one hand calmly. "Let them run." One outlaw frowned. "Boss." Kane stared toward the forest. "Mercer's leading us exactly where we need to go." Back in the forest, Walter finally forced everyone to stop near an abandoned cabin hidden between pine trees. Caleb slid off the horse and collapsed instantly. "Caleb." Emily rushed beside him. Blood soaked his coat heavily now. Walter tore the fabric open carefully. "The bullet passed through," he said quickly. "That's good, but he's bleeding bad," Noah whispered. Caleb's face had gone pale gray. Still, he pushed himself upright against the cabin wall. "We ain't stopping long." Walter stared at him in disbelief. "You're half dead, still breathing." Emily looked furious now. "You always do this." Caleb blinked weakly. "Do what?" "Act like dying doesn't matter." The cowboy looked at her quietly. For a second, he saw another little girl. Another terrified face from years ago. And guilt crushed his chest again. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "You don't gotta save everybody alone." The words hit deeper than the bullet. Caleb slowly looked away. Night fell over the mountains as Walter treated the wound inside the old cabin. Outside, wind whispered through the trees. Noah slept beside Daisy near the fire while Tomas stood watch nervously at the window. Emily sat beside Caleb in silence. Finally she whispered, "What really happened at Black Creek?" The fire crackled softly. Caleb stared into the flames a long time before answering. It was supposed to be simple. His voice sounded hollow. "Two mining companies fighting over land. I worked security." Walter listened quietly nearby. "But Kane was there too," Caleb continued. "He wanted the mine for himself." The cowboy's jaw tightened painfully. One night shooting started. Buildings caught fire. Folks ran everywhere. Emily barely breathed. And the little girl. Caleb closed his eyes briefly. "She got trapped." His voice cracked for the first time. "I tried reaching her." Silence filled the cabin. But the roof collapsed. Emily's anger faded slowly. "You thought she died?" Caleb nodded once. "For years." Then Tomas suddenly stiffened at the window. "Someone's outside." Everyone froze. Footsteps creaked softly across snow-dusted leaves. One set. Not many. Caleb reached painfully for his revolver. The cabin door slowly opened. A woman stepped inside carrying a lantern. Mid-20s. Dark hair. Weathered coat. Sharp eyes full of caution. The moment Caleb saw her, the revolver slipped from his hand. Because he recognized those eyes instantly. The same terrified eyes from the burning mine all those years ago. The woman stared at him in shock. Then whispered, "Caleb Mercer." Emily looked between them confused. "You know her?" The woman's eyes never left Caleb. "Oh, he knows me." Caleb looked like he'd seen a ghost. "You survived." The woman nodded slowly, but a lot of others didn't. The room fell completely silent. Then she spoke the words Caleb feared most. "And it's time you learned who really caused the massacre at Black Creek." Outside the cabin, hidden among the trees, Silas Kane smiled in the darkness. Because everything was finally falling into place. The cowboy who finally found a home. The cabin fell silent except for the crackling fire. Caleb Mercer stared at the woman like the past had stepped out of the grave. "You survived," he whispered again. The woman slowly lowered her lantern. "My name's Sarah now." Caleb swallowed hard, but he remembered another name. A little girl crying in a burning mining town. A child he thought he failed to save. "Annie," he said softly. The woman's eyes watered slightly. "Nobody's called me that in years." Emily looked confused. "You're the girl from Black Creek." Sarah nodded once. Walter crossed himself quietly in disbelief. Caleb struggled to stand despite the pain in his side. "I saw the roof collapse." "It did." Sarah's expression darkened. "But somebody pulled me out." Caleb frowned. "Who?" Sarah's face hardened like stone. "Silas Kane." Everyone froze. Noah whispered. "The outlaw saved you." Sarah gave a bitter laugh. "No. He rescued me because he needed someone to blame." The fire snapped loudly between them. Caleb's chest tightened. "What are you talking about?" Sarah stepped closer slowly. "Kane started the massacre." The words hit like thunder. "He wanted the mine empty so he could steal everything underneath it." Walter stared in horror. "The silver veins." Sarah nodded. "Kane hired gunmen to attack both mining camps and make it look like a war." Caleb's breathing slowed dangerously. "No, you were set up from the beginning." Caleb remembered every terrible moment. Every bullet, every scream, every nightmare. Sarah continued quietly. "When the fire spread, Kane pulled me from the building. Then he told everyone you caused the explosion." Emily looked toward Caleb. "He lied." Sarah nodded. "He needed a monster people would fear." Caleb sank slowly into the chair behind him. All these years, running, hiding, punishing himself, for something another man caused. Walter whispered, "Dear God." Sarah looked toward Caleb again. "You spent years carrying Kane's sins." The cowboy stared into the fire silently. Then something changed behind his eyes. Not guilt anymore. Anger. Cold, sharp, deadly. Outside, a branch snapped. Tomas rushed to the window. "They found us." Riders emerged from the darkness surrounding the cabin. Lanterns glowed between trees. Rifles gleamed under moonlight. Silas Kane's army. At least 30 men. And at the center of them, Elias Blackthorne smiled beneath his black hat. "Well," Walter muttered nervously, "this seems bad." Caleb stood slowly despite the pain. "No." He checked his revolver cylinder carefully. "It's worse." Outside, Kane's deep voice echoed through the trees. "Mercer." The cabin remained silent. Kane smiled faintly. "You know how this ends." Caleb walked toward the door calmly. Emily grabbed his arm. "You can't fight all of them." He looked down at her. "No." "Then what do we do?" For a moment, Caleb studied the frightened children. Noah clutching Daisy protectively. Emily trying to stay brave. 3 souls who deserved more than fear and running. Finally Caleb spoke quietly. "We survive." Then he stepped outside alone. Moonlight covered the snowy clearing. Every outlaw aimed guns at him instantly. Kane sat tall on horseback watching calmly. Elias smirked nearby. "There he is," Elias mocked. "Ghost of Black Creek." Caleb ignored him. His eyes stayed locked on Kane. "You burned that town." Kane shrugged slightly. "Business. You murdered innocent people. They were poor. Nobody remembers poor people." Caleb's jaw tightened. Behind him, Sarah stepped from the cabin doorway. Kane's smile widened slightly. "Sarah." Her voice shook with rage. "You destroyed everything." Kane looked almost bored. "You should have stayed hidden." Then he raised one hand slightly. Outlaws cocked rifles instantly. Caleb noticed. So did Sarah. This was it. No more running. No more surviving. Kane intended to bury everyone here forever. Then Emily suddenly appeared beside Caleb holding the ledger tightly. "You want this?" she shouted. Kane's eyes locked onto the book instantly. "There it is." Emily raised it higher. "This proves everything." Elias moved his horse forward slowly. "Give it here, little girl." "No." The child's voice echoed through the mountains. And somehow, that tiny act of courage changed everything. Because for the first time in years, the frightened people standing behind Caleb stopped acting helpless. Walter stepped outside with a shotgun. Then Tomas. Then Sarah. Even Noah stood beside Emily holding a revolver twice too big for his hands. Kane laughed softly. "A family of heroes." Caleb glanced back at them, and something warm hit his chest unexpectedly. Family. The thing he thought he lost forever. Cain's expression turned deadly cold. Kill them. Gunfire exploded instantly. Bang, bang, bang. The clearing became chaos. Caleb fired with terrifying speed. 2 outlaws dropped before others even reacted. Walter blasted another rider off his horse. Sarah fired from the cabin porch with deadly precision. Emily pulled Noah and Daisy behind cover as bullets shredded the wooden walls. Elias charged forward through the smoke. Caleb met him halfway. Bang! Both men missed. Elias grinned wildly. This is how legends die. They fired again almost simultaneously. Bang! Elias staggered suddenly. He looked down in shock at the blood spreading across his chest. Caleb lowered his revolver slowly. Elias laughed weakly. Guess, you finally got your second chance. Then he collapsed into the snow. Nearby, Cain realized the fight was turning. Several of his men already lay dead or wounded, and the townspeople of Red Hollow had arrived behind the outlaws carrying rifles. Tomas smiled through smoke. They followed us. The people Cain terrorized for years finally stood together. And even monsters fear united people. Cain's face darkened instantly. He grabbed his rifle and fired toward Emily. Caleb saw it. Time slowed. Emily froze. The rifle flashed. Boom. Caleb threw himself in front of her. The bullet slammed into his shoulder hard enough to spin him sideways. Caleb! Emily screamed. Cain turned his horse immediately to escape into the forest. But Sarah stepped into the clearing. Calm. Steady. Rifle raised. You don't get to run anymore. Boom. The shot echoed through the mountains. Silas Cain fell from his horse into the snow. And for the first time in years, silence returned to Black Creek. The battle was over. Morning sunlight slowly rose across the mountains hours later. Snow glittered softly around the cabin. The surviving outlaws had fled. Walter and the townspeople gathered weapons while Tomas prepared horses. And beside the fire outside the cabin, Caleb sat wrapped in blankets while Emily changed the bandage on his shoulder. You almost died again, she muttered angrily. Caleb winced slightly, still working on the habit. Emily rolled her eyes, then quietly hugged him. The cowboy froze in surprise. Small arms wrapped around him carefully. Not out of fear, out of love. Slowly, Caleb rested a hand against her back. Noah sat nearby feeding Daisy pieces of bread while Sarah watched the sunrise silently. Finally she walked over to Caleb. What'll you do now? The cowboy looked toward the children. For years, he'd wandered empty roads believing he deserved loneliness. But these kids had changed something inside him. Maybe broken things could heal after all. Emily looked up carefully. You gonna leave? Caleb stared at the mountains one last time. Then slowly shook his head. No. The girl smiled through tears. And for the first time in many years, so did Caleb Mercer. Weeks later, Red Hollow began rebuilding. The ledger exposed the Blackthorns, crimes across the territory. Federal marshals arrived. Stolen lands were returned. Families came home. And on the edge of town, near green fields beneath wide western skies, a small ranch slowly came back to life. Children's laughter echoed through the barn. Daisy chased chickens badly. Noah learned horses. Emily pretended she wasn't happy most days. And every evening, a tired cowboy sat quietly on the porch watching the sunset with people who finally needed him, not as a gunslinger, not as a legend, but as family, because sometimes the most dangerous men in the world aren't saved by bullets. Sometimes, they're saved by children who ask them to stay. Please friends spot my channel. Like, share, comment, subscribe for more stories. Thanks for watching.